Hi, my name is Joe Williams. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and I want to talk about the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine's psychology program, which I attended from 2005 to 2010. Um, First of all, I live about a mile away from PCOM, and I actually have a long history with the institution because, for example, I have two. I don't like to use the term half older sisters, Pat and Brenda. Brenda is my father's daughter from a previous marriage. She lives in Germany because my father went to medical school at the University of Heidelberg, and I really don't know her. She doesn't speak English. And I spoke to her one time. But my mother also had a daughter named Pat, and she's Jamaican American. Her father was named Bert Myrie, and he was a DO, a doctor of osteopathy. He went to PCOM, and he died, I think, in the mid 1980s. He went to the University of Pennsylvania as an undergraduate, I believe, in the 1950s. He actually had a story that he told my sister. So I just heard about it indirectly. I actually never met him. But when he was an undergrad, he told her that one of the professors said, when he walked in the room, "I smell a nigger in the woodpile." And so my sister said to him, why didn't you complain? Why didn't you, protest? He said, "I just wanted to be a doctor." Um, my next door neighbor, I live in a section of Philadelphia called Winfield. My next door neighbor's name was, he died. His name was Dr. Thomas Powell. He looked a little bit like Martin Luther King. In fact, he said one time he got assaulted in an airport because somebody mistook him for Martin Luther King. He was a surgeon. He also went to the University of Pennsylvania as an undergraduate and went to PCOM and became a surgeon. Uh, then there is a guy who was my friend, but a bit of a falling out. But his father also went to PCOM, and he was a psychiatrist. Um, and there were two guys. I went to Central High School, Philadelphia. There were two guys. One was named, or is named, I should say, Charles Bridges. And now he didn't go to PCOM, but his father went to PCOM. Charles Bridges, I think, was the youngest person to go to Harvard Medical School at the age of 18. He went through Harvard as an undergraduate, something like 2.5 years, got a SCD from MIT, and then there's another guy. I guess he's in his 60s at this point, but there's another guy's named Cato Lawrenson, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. His mother was a DO, and he went to Princeton as an undergrad. He also went to both he and Charles both went to my high school. They're much older than I am, but I think Dr. Lawrenson got a National Medal of Freedom or a National Medal of Science from Barack Obama. Anyway, his mother went to PCOM, and Dr. Ethel Allen went to PCOM. So I always thought that PCOM was African American friendly. So it never really occurred to me. Then I had one of my favorite uncles, my Uncle Joe. In 1986, he was a bricklayer and he came home one day and he thought he'd had a heat stroke, but in all actuality, he had diabetes, and he did not realize. I think he was 56 years old, and he slipped into a coma, and the ambulance took him over to. At that time, PCOM actually had a hospital, and he died. He blood sugar over about 500. It's kind of interesting because I have to monitor my blood sugar now as well. So I started off. I was a teacher. Um, I had a master's degree. Well, I still have a master's degree from Cheney University in education, and I switched over to mental health. My father was a psychiatrist, so I'm quite familiar with mental health. And I went to PCOM, I believe, in 2003, 2004, and took Arthur Freeman, who passed away, died, I think last year. He had a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy certification program, and he actually started PCOM psychology department, uh, if I understand correctly. He wrote about 20 books. I jokingly thought, he was sort of a legend in his own mind because he would tell you uh, all the people he knows. Well, and in fact, he did work with Aaron Beck, and I think he was a Adlerian type of person. I doubt he knew Alfred Adler, but anyway, it was a pretty good course. So, but I was working in community mental health at the Juvenile Justice Center at the time, and my supervisor told me that it's nice that I took the CBT uh, certification, but that I would need a clinical degree. And so I said, well, you know, uh, PCOM's right there. It's a good school. Um, I liked Arthur Freeman, seemed like, good guy. And as I mentioned, I've already had a lot of history with the institution, and it's a mile away. So I went there, and basically it was a very good program, like in terms of teaching cognitive uh, behavioral therapy. I think it was called cognitive therapy at the time. I went there again between 2005 and 2010. And I remember the first day I went in, it must have been August 2005. On the first day, I was getting my picture done, and the head of the program asked me if I would be all right. And I said, I took it in the lightest way. Um, the group that I was in, the class that I was in, I think had 62 people in it, all women, just me and one other guy. I don't even remember his name. Um, anyway, I started having experiences that made me feel a bit degraded. Like, for example, that first comment, I took it as being concerned about me. Um, and I'm a little hesitant to use the names of the various professors because I'm not totally sure about defamation, although I'm telling the truth about my experience. And I'm not totally clear as to what I'm allowed to say in terms of defamation, libel, slander type stuff. I'd actually like to write about this topic, but and I think more broadly, what I'm interested in is what rights do students have? Graduate students, undergraduate students, high school students how much disrespect do they have to tolerate? How much disrespect does a student have to tolerate? So let me give you an example. I've got so many. I want to make sure that I hit on all of them. So there was that comment. I didn't mean anything to me at the time. Do you think you'll be okay? But then I took a class. I don't remember one of the first classes that I took. It was we had to write a short little paper on something involving psychology and how and sort of a political issue. That's all I sort of remember. And at the time, George Bush had just invaded Iraq, right? And I had attended some anti-war protests. I felt that the premise for invading Iraq was a lie, is all lies. There were no WMDs. And there was, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. So I found it really infuriating. So we were supposed to write at a minimum 2 pages for this little paper. And I wrote something like 20 plus pages on the impact of the invasion of Iraq on the Iraqi, in particular, children. I think it might have had to do with children. Anyway, I remember there was this one particular article that I kept quoting from the Lancet, and the death count was already in the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. And the woman who taught that course, she gave me an F on my paper. And she said I didn't use APA style. But I had an opportunity to rewrite the paper. But she also wanted me to not focus on Iraq, but to talk about war more broadly, which I thought was interesting. So I actually had to change my paper and talk about, and she actually gave me articles that she wanted me to include. Okay. So that was experience number 1, which I thought was really odd because I just started the school and I already was getting ready to flunk out. All right. So I changed the paper to the way she wanted it written, and I forgot what grade I got. I got a B or something like that. So then I took another class. I ended up I took 4 classes with one particular professor, and again, I'd like to name her. I don't know if I should name her. But anyway, in the first class, or maybe it was the second class I took with her, I looked at my grades. She gave me a B plus in the class. And I looked at my grades and I added them up, and I, did the average or whatever. And I felt I got an A minus. I wasn't angry or anything like that. I just thought I calculated my grades differently, and that she made a mistake. Because I did that, I think I emailed it to her or whatever. I was called in for a meeting. This was the first of several meetings that I would have to attend. And I was told that, and there were 3 professors present. And I think the professor in question came in for a moment, but I was reprimanded. Now, I've never had an experience like this in my entire life or since. I went to the Episcopal Academy, which was pretty elite, Central High School, Cheney, University of Pennsylvania, community college, Temple University, Franklin Marshall College, the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science, which is now the University of the Sciences. Never in my life have I ever experienced that kind of meeting before. And I, you know, it's as if I was being uppity, right? I was, who am I to dare to question this professor's math? Okay. So now I'm getting a little paranoid. And in fact, I asked, well, how am I supposed to communicate with a professor and explain that I don't agree? That was never answered. Then I was told that I would need to not directly interact with her, that I should turn my papers into the director of the program and not to her. And then I guess that was, I guess they, the director realized that was completely insane. It would be totally ridiculous. So she backed off of that. But I noticed in the 4 classes that I took with this professor that my grades were getting lower and lower, and I found with less and less explanation. In fact, there was one paper I remember there was no commentary at all, and I think I still have it. And I was at this point afraid to say anything. Okay, so it's like paranoia now. And then I remember my advisor is another story. My advisor, I would meet with her regularly to talk about my progress. So I'm a kind of like a happy-go-lucky type of person. And I remember I went in and she asked me, how do you think you're doing? I think I told her I think I'm doing well. I always want to talk in class and participate. And then she said, I think she said, yeah, you might talk too much. I said, what? She accused me. She said there was a complaint that I was making sexual innuendo in class. Now, again, this is a program that where there's only 2 men, although we would take classes with other students, but there were 2 males and all females, and mostly white females. So I'm already hyper aware of who I'm with. It was almost like, I feel like it was almost like being in a woman's high school almost. That's what it felt like. First of all, that the professors were taking such a personal approach to me was bizarre. It was like, even as a child, I never had that much scrutiny in my life. She said I made sexual innuendo in class. So I was not aware of ever saying anything. Like sometimes I might look at people, but it's not sexual necessarily, but I never said anything to any female student ever at PCOM. In fact, I felt that I had a very cordial relationship with pretty much all of them. But then at this point, like, I was really paranoid. I started asking the women in my program, have I said anything that was offensive? And they're like, no, you're fine. Did I do anything? Did I give you a look or anything? There was one student there who I was very close to. She happened to have been a lesbian at the time. So there was no tension there at all. And she was absolutely wonderful. But then I asked my advisor, I said, well, who said I made sexual innuendo? She she said, I don't believe it. I'm going to mention it to you. I don't believe it, but she's going to put it in my file. It's in my file. I don't know what I'm accused of saying, but it was important enough to mention. I have no right to defend myself, and maybe I could learn something. Maybe there were, if I knew what offended somebody, maybe I could find out what it was and do something about it. No, just know that you're accused of making sexual innuendo. Wow. Okay, so that's another thing. Then there was another incident. I was in a group therapy class, and it's actually my advisor was substituting as the teacher that day. Now, I worked as a community, they call it like a mobile therapist or behavior specialist. At that time, I was only a mobile therapist in Philadelphia. And I worked with this one particular kid for about 4 years. Okay. Every week, saw him pretty much every week for 4 years. Okay. So I got to know his entire family. And like the nature of my job is, I go to the houses. We go to the house. I think it's a wonderful program, the wraparound program. This kid, he's amazing. He was a kind, wonderful human being. Long story short, his father had been murdered. His father had been incarcerated, and then right after he got out, he was murdered. So, and I met his father, and his older brother, who had a scholarship to college, ended up murdering his girlfriend's father, and simultaneously was murdered by the father. So they killed each other simultaneously and died. So I believe I just found out. So this, as I was walking into the group therapy class, my advisor said, "How are you doing?" And I know that usually when people ask you how you're doing, they really don't want to know. But I said, "Wow, I think I tried to explain what had happened." And she said, "Well, we all have problems." So that was her attitude. Then there was another incident. Now, this professor actually, uh, I got along with. I got along with. It seemed like, in fact, he even I contacted him after I left PCOM for the final time. Um, and one time I walked into his classroom. It was my birthday. I don't remember exactly what year, but it's October 17th. And as a birthday gift to myself, I I ordered Albert Bandura's book Self Efficacy, and I brought it to his class. Sort of Bandura's magnum opus, right? So I came in the room. Now the professor was sitting maybe 9 feet away from me at all times. At no point had I come anywhere near him, right? And I walk in, sit down. I think I was early, and I'm excited because I got my book, right? So he looks at me reading the book, and he said, "Did you steal my book?" Right? "Did you steal my book?" And now you could say, well, he's joking, it was a light comment. He looked in his bag. He looked in his bag and saw that he still had his book. And then he said, oh, no. Okay. And I was also accused of ruminating too much. But I did actually. I sat there and I thought, now, I thought about that moment, and I still think about that moment. Why would he think it? Now, see, to me, there already we have racial undertones to what's going on because hypersexual. I'm so out of control that I'm actually making sexual comments in the middle of class. I'm so out of control that I stole a book from a professor, even though it was physically impossible for me to have done so. Okay, so then there's more incidents. Okay, then the director, I had to write a paper on Gestalt therapy, right? Fritz Perls, and I turned the paper into the director, and she told me that I would not be able to understand. That I can't understand Fritz Perls. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it is kind of difficult to understand Gestalt therapy. But, when I was looking at Fritz Perls, he looked a little bit like my father in a way. I think he would have been a bit older than my father, but like I was looking at him particularly on, his last autobiography. And he does write, like, I think it's called In and Out of the Garbage Pail or something like that. He's kind of a strange guy. But, I thought about that too. Like, like I said, my dad was a psychiatrist. I've heard about these guys as a child. Why wouldn't I be able to understand Fritz Perls? So again, questioning my intelligence, my ethics, and also, ethics. Like I'm a thief, hypersexual, and I'm basically stupid, is what they're saying. Now it's interesting because I went into another program because now, like I said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and the program was very similar, even though one's psychology and one's social work are kind of the same difference in many ways. But except social work, with psychology, there's sort of a pretense of objectivity, I think. Anyway, so there was that situation. Then there was another incident. I was in a research class, right? And again, the classes are mostly women. And I noticed myself that quite often the professor would look at me. He would look at me. I don't know why. I got a B in that class, actually. But this one woman thought that I must have an A. And she thought that because I was a male, that this professor must really favor me. So what she actually said, and I'm not making this up, she said he favored me because we both have penises. And I did not respond to that at all. I didn't respond to that at all. But I thought, well, what if I had said that to her? And I would have had another meeting with the director of the program again. I can't even imagine if I would have said that. Then I took a class in psychopharmacology, right? And the guy who was teaching that class, there was a Eastern European young woman sitting next to me, and he said to her, like right before the break, in front of the class, right, that her sweater fit her really well. He liked the way her sweater fit her. Now, maybe he didn't think there was anything inappropriate about that comment. She did. Like during the break, she turned to our classmates and me and said, "Can you believe he just said that?" Now, I never said anything like that. I never said anything remotely like that, ever. So that's why I feel like I was a bit targeted. So then, um, so there were just a number of incidents like that. I found the school to be, if not center, maybe a little center right leaning, because I remember another class, the same professor who I got lower and lower grades with, she, I remember Tukey Williams was being executed, and she had no problem with that. I don't know if I thought for some reason psychology was this humane field, with you would think they'd be rather progressive people, psychologists, but not necessarily. I mean, psychologists were sort of involved with the torture program. And what's interesting to me too is psychology itself. Like if you don't want to say PCOM is racist, psychology has a pretty racist history. I actually like to, and pretty much like everything else, every other field, I should say. But I mean, uh, Stephen Jay Gould sort of wrote about it in The Mismeasure of Man, not sort of, definitely. And then he updated his book after the bell curve. I mean, that's a psychologist, Richard Herrnstein, right? But I met this guy. He was a professor at uh, Rutgers Camden. His name was Dr. William H. Tucker. You should check out his books, right? He wrote a book called The Science and Politics of Racial Research. And he goes through the hideous history of racism in psychology, from Raymond Cattell to Arthur Jensen to the bell curve. And this guy slips my memory. I actually have his book. There's a Canadian psychology professor who had 2 doctorates. He's about the most unhinged racist uh, I've ever heard. I don't know why. Oh, J. Philip Rushton. Look him up. I'm going to do more and more videos. So then, um, I actually was thrown out of the program. Then I argued my way back in. Then I was thrown out a second time. I actually completed all of the work, all of the work of this master's degree. I had to pass some kind of uh, it was like a standardized patient, where we had to do like this session using, I believe it was CBT, where we had these standardized patients. And apparently I was not doing well on that. And then I had to write some kind of paper. At this point, I'm so defeated. Um, I was allowed back in the program. And then I was doing my practicum. So at this point, I'd done one practicum. That was another experience. The woman who was supposed to be my advisor in the practicum, she told me I reminded of her dog. Isn't that nice? And then so I had to do a second practicum. Now, I did violate the rule, uh, which a lot of students did. I took a practicum at the same place where I worked. But now I know some people actually, I know in a couple of schools I've gone to, they actually use their actual job as their practicum. And that's a definite no. You can't do that. But I did, like, I work with kids, and I was working with kids at a place called Community Council, and also a couple other agencies. But for my practicum, I was working in the adult wing. Okay, I was working with they call it the Adult Coping Clinic. And like 2 weeks before the end of my experience with PCOM, I was going to be hobbling across the the finish line, so to speak. I remember I was so happy. I came in. I brought like this whole big uh, box of box of Joe from Dunkin' Donuts, I believe. And I wanted to bring everybody munchkins and coffee and everything like that. And I remember the woman who was the manager of the adult coping clinic. Mind you, I'd been there from September, and then now it's like May. And she says to me, "Why are you here?" I said, "What? What do you mean?" And she's like, "Oh, you didn't get the email?" So then I look at the email and I find out that I'm under investigation. So now I'm really panicking. And I was taking some courses, and one was actually some courses I didn't even need to take. I already had but I wanted to take an IQ um, class on intelligence test. I frankly think I was treated horribly in that class too. Now, again, the guy I just mentioned, William Tucker, that was his area of expertise. He had a PhD from Princeton, and his doctorate was funded by ETS, which is they're located in Princeton. I mean, really read his book. He wrote a book called on the Pioneer Fund. Look into those people. He wrote a book on Raymond Cattell. Raymond Cattell tried to sue him. He wrote a book called The Science and Politics of Racial Research. He was just a wonderful person. I emailed him, and he came over. Rutgers Camden is like literally right across the Ben Franklin Bridge. But he met with me. We went out and talked. Went to this vegetarian Chinese restaurant. Anyway, so I went off on a tangent, but I was told I was under investigation, and then I needed to just leave. Now, I was in the process of purchasing my uncle. He had been recently deceased. I was going to purchase. I got a loan from the bank, my credit union. I was going to buy his house. I was going to graduate. You know, I had a really horrible experience at this school. At least I was going to have a degree. Well, that's another thing. Another professor said that I viewed PCOM, this degree, as a diploma mill. That's another insult. I'd been there for 5 years for basically what's a 2-year degree. And it's just incredible. And by the way, I'm in an extraordinary amount of debt right now from this diploma mill. That was another thing. The woman who was my practicum advisor, she talked about how I would be making $85 an hour, and I really didn't deserve it. First of all, I didn't make $85 an hour at the time. I think I was making like $30 an hour, and I didn't even know you could make that kind of money in mental health. Now I know you can make a lot more. And now I am making a lot more with the licensures. And so 2 weeks, I mean, just imagine this, 2 weeks before I graduate, it's like the rug is pulled out from underneath me. And community council would not even tell me what the investigation was about. That's unbelievable. And then, without ever speaking to me, just told me it was they found the investigation was founded, and never even told me what it was about. At no point was I involved in the investigation. And it's like, so I lost my job. because I lost my practicum, I couldn't get another one, so I failed the practicum after I spent uh, 9, 10 months there, whatever it is. Failed it. That's it. It's over. So that means I also failed out of PCOM. I tried to tell the uh, the professor of the intelligence class, the intelligence testing class, could you give me an incomplete? Because first of all, I didn't even need the class. I didn't even need the class at all. Uh, no, she said, no, no, no. It's too bad. I was at this point panicking. I don't know if it's fair to say I was panicking, but I certainly was anxious. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't write any papers anyway. So then, of course, I had like another meeting. And another thing that was really interesting is that I noticed that all of a sudden this investigation started because my advisor came back to my site a second time. She come the first time, but now she came a second time. So I lost everything. I couldn't at this point. Now I can't buy my uncle's house because I don't have a job, and I'm not going to get a degree. All I have is 95% of a degree, and no chance of getting a license. What am I going to do? It was devastating. It's absolutely devastating. Then there were a lot of other things going on in my life which were absolutely horrifying. I had to go get a lawyer. I got a lawyer after I'm already been kicked out. My uncle Gary left me an inheritance like $44,000. So I spent $4,000 some dollars on this lawyer, and he spoke to the community council attorney, and they said I thought that maybe I was being investigated for some kind of billing or insurance fraud. Like that's the only thing I could think of, because frankly I didn't do anything. Not that I committed insurance fraud either, but that's what people usually get in trouble for. Uh, so no, not at all. He told me that I was talking about sex too much. Once again, like supposedly I'm talking about sex in class. And then I was accused of having sex with the adult sister of a client. Now, I don't know how you prove a negative. I never had sex with anybody. Actually, full stop. I wasn't having sex with anybody, to be completely honest. Not in my personal life, and certainly not anyone related to anyone I worked with at all, ever. And I don't even know who made the accusation. There was one person, like, so I started racking my brain, thinking, like, who would even say such a thing? And there was maybe one person, but I didn't even know if they had an older sister. Um, if so, I never met the person. And it seems to me that if community council would have bothered to even talk to me for 5 minutes, we could have figured it out. Because to be honest with you, I would only go to work, go to my practicum, or go to school and go home. That's all I did. I didn't date anybody. I wasn't doing anything. I was 100% focused on getting my degree. But it was all. I'd also like to make another comment. It's actually true that I was talking about sex a lot. I was talking about sex a lot with the adults, not with the kids. And that's because the adults were talking about sex. The adults were talking about sex. It's not that I would bring up sex. First of all, uh, community council had an intake that was like a couple hundred. I mean, maybe not. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe like 100 questions long. And I remember I was told I would have to ask, each prospective client, this entire uh, you know questionnaire. And I remember it said something like, "Do you engage in high risk sexual behavior?" And I remember this one woman got really angry. And I said, "Ma'am, I didn't make up these questions. In fact, I was embarrassed to ask some of the questions." And she said to me, "Do you engage in high risk activity? I don't feel comfortable sitting back," because we were sitting back in like these little, like, I mean, they had windows, but these like little, small, tiny little offices. Then the adult clients would come in and talk about sex, like I said, but not, I didn't get any prurient or titillating, you know, I had no interest in the stories from a titillating perspective, and if that's the right way to say it. So, for example, a man was raped by his brother, and you think, that's sex, I guess. I mean, it's sex. And decades later, he, on the one hand, loved his brother, but was very torn about, hating him as well, right? It's very complex feelings. Another woman was in a sexual relationship with her father as a teenager. And then he stopped having sex with her and started dating adult women. And what blew my mind in that story was that she was upset that he stopped. Not that he had sex with her, but that he stopped having sex with her. Then there was another guy who he seemed to black out while I was doing like a timeline of his life. And I asked him, "Well, what happened during this year?" And he literally just started shaking. And I have no idea what that was about, but it was pretty terrifying. And I didn't know what to do about it. So I would bring up these situations. And there's another woman who believed that one of her neighbors had electrodes and was shocking her, sexually, and wanted to contact the FBI about it. I didn't know what to do about these situations. I mean, I thought that was it's not funny, but I just trying to explain that that's not really happening. Just trying to explain to her, like, oh, that's not possible. She did like research and brought in all these papers and everything. So what was the other one? Then there was a woman who came in and said that she'd been engaged in sex work, and these two brothers were holding her hostage at a local hotel. It was horrifying. It wasn't like sexual, like pornography. I mean, it was like criminal. I mean, horrifying, incest, rape. And I remember the on-site supervisor I had. She said that she told me, like, I could do prolonged exposure, but actually not to do what I would need to do is prolonged exposure, but that I did not have the training, which is fair. I'm actually getting it now. I'm going to get it now this year. I'm also trying to study cognitive processing. So now I actually know more about therapy than I did then. But that experience was devastating for me. First of all, like I said, I'm in an enormous amount of debt. Still, I work constantly, um, and I'm also very paranoid. Still, because I don't know. I'm afraid to have a private practice. No, because what happens? Anybody can accuse me of anything. And listen, I have my own flaws. Like, I'm not a perfect person. There are some. The thing is, there are legitimate criticisms. Like, I I I need to do my paperwork faster. I can do things better, but I think they went um, beyond. And in fact, I don't think a lot of the criticisms had anything to do with me personally. And I remember I went to a writer from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm not going to mention her name either, but uh, she talked to me for an hour. But then she talked to them, and they told her, well, it's more of he has a personal problem. It's my personal problem. I went to the ACLU. I went to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. I went to the NAACP. There was a white attorney, and he said, well, um, if you have $35,000, and I went to other lawyers too, who said about the same thing. I would have to prove that I was treated differently than everybody else. How am I going to do that? How am I going to do that? So he's like, well, you might as well just go take a nice vacation. I was like, well, first of all, I don't have $35,000. And he said, well, black people have been through a lot more. And somehow, and he said, think of the doctors. So the black doctors who probably, like my sister's father, Bert. And, I do know that, for example, if you read Paul Robeson's book, Here I Stand, read about what he went through at Rutgers, still graduated valedictorian. And also sometimes I sort of pass, but I felt like there was a there's a racial aspect to my treatment. Again, if you're talking about hypersexuality, I'm stupid. I'm not moral. I'm also, aggressive. You know, I had the audacity, the uppityness of asking about how dare I ask the professor about my grade, which to me I thought was a regular thing. Like I said, I went through I went back to school and almost did this exact same program over again, but at a different school. Did 2 years of internship, practicum, whatever you want to call it. Totally different experience. Totally never faced that kind of personal. This is one of the reasons why I know it's not me. It's not a personal problem. The next program, they did not treat me in the same way at all. In fact, I had to write a paper on Gestalt therapy for the next program. And you know what? Instead of the professor telling me, "Oh, you can't understand Fritz Perls and Gestalt therapy," you know what he did? He showed me. We looked at videos of there's a video, I can't remember what it's called, but it's where Fritz Perls, Carl Rogers, and I can't think of the other one, Albert Ellis maybe. They all interview the same patient. And so you can see their different styles. He told me about that. I never, of course, instead of, and it didn't take any more effort for him to show me how Gestalt therapy actually works, as opposed to telling me I'm too stupid to understand Gestalt therapy. And then, Philadelphia is a city that's like half African American. I didn't feel that PCOM reflected the general population of the city, and certainly didn't reflect the people I worked with. I mean, and what about the faculty? So I forgot, I don't even remember how I found out about this. I contacted Drexel University. They had, I think it was called a cultural competency program, where they would evaluate other programs and see how they're doing culturally. And I told the woman who answered me, and she said, "Oh, PCOM," like knowingly, right? I said, "Yeah, PCOM." I said, "Could I read the report?" She said, "No, I'm afraid not, because they paid for the evaluation, and they own it. You can't see it." But yeah, she said, "Well, let me just say I'm not particularly surprised by what you're telling me." So it wasn't really personal to me, in my opinion. And so I would like to say more about this. I like to keep talking about it, because I think that I don't see why. Why does a graduate student have to be feel humiliated? And why isn't there, what recourse is there? Why do I have to take that because somebody has a PhD, or they have status? It's kind of interesting too, because you know I'm viewed as aggressive in this situation. I have no power. I had like no power at all. I'm the student. They control whether I graduate, my grades. I have no what power do I have over them? There were three professors, and they would bring me into these meetings. I don't even know how many meetings I had to go into. But and the 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 professors, I never had a personal conversation with any of them. I don't know them. The only time I ever interacted with them, maybe except for once, was for them to sit in these little meetings where there was this extreme power differential, and evaluate me, sit in judgment of me. It was terrible. I thought it was one of the most horrible experiences I've ever had, and I've had problems, not like this. Like when I went to the Episcopal Academy, I was on the honor roll. I mean, you don't get much more elite than EA. I mean, PCOMs. I mean, come on. And Central High School, I really, I mean, I had some issues there, but nothing like this. And even at the University of Pennsylvania, maybe in the lab, I experienced some behavior, which I'd like to talk about that too, but nothing like PCOM. It was just unbelievable. I mean, and I'm gonna have to talk about this again. Uh, oh, there was another thing. Remember when there was Hurricane Katrina, right? Now this isn't the professor's fault, but I remember my grandmother's house. She lived on 2626 New Orleans Street, New Orleans. I found out it was flooded. Like, you know, and I mentioned it. I was giving a talk, and I was like, wow, I mentioned my grandmother's house was flooded. And people started laughing. That was another thing, too. I was walking out of a classroom, that same research class I was talking about earlier, and the 76ers used to play at PCOM. They used to practice at PCOM. And I believe Allen Iverson was driving out in his Bentley. And I remember prior to being in the program, Dr. Freeman made a comment, like he was sick of seeing these NBA players driving around in these huge cars. But I was walking out with a woman. I think it's the same woman who explained why the professor liked me in particular, having to do with our anatomy, shared anatomy. And she said, I think I said, oh, Allen Iverson, he's so, his Bentley is so big that like his head was barely over the dashboard. I said, oh, look, there's Allen Iverson. And my classmate said, oh, he's a criminal. He's a criminal. And I said, what? Why do you say that? Oh, he just is. So to me, it was that kind of environment. And then I remember in the intelligence class, this woman, she was like had all these tattoos and like earrings. Maybe that's what they think is sexual innuendo, because like I was looking at her. I mean, I was looking at her just like with the, and I overheard her talking about how she's a singer and all this stuff. She turned to me, like never said a word to me ever. She turns to me and said, "You better work." Like some kind, like what? I don't go around thinking about race or like I said, I'm usually happy-go-lucky, but at some point I was starting to get paranoid and like watching my back and everything else, like all kinds of feelings you should never have in a school, let alone graduate school. It's insane. And I remember another time there was in that same intelligence class, intelligence testing, psychometrics class, there was a black male and there was a white woman, and they were getting on the elevator. And I guess I was on the elevator too. And she just blurted out, "Are you going to kill me?" And he handled it really well. And just like, I don't even know why she said that. It's just so random, like apropos of nothing. And I just remember he calmed the situation down. Like he didn't react at all. And she sounded crazy. But it's that kind of, to me, it's that kind of environment. And I'm going to try to talk about it some more. This has kind of been therapeutic for me. Thank you.